came in. And here it is now. The story of falling down.
Cold. My name is Dan.
Hello, Dan.
Thank you. Someone realized this is the audience participation part of the show. Hello, my name is Dan.
Hello, Dan.
Thank you very much. I am not falling down. We'll be talking about falling down a little bit later. Those of you who know anything about me know that I write a lot of one-person shows, some for other people, some for me. But this is a little bit weird for me. See, the people I usually write about are heroes of mine. You know, they're people who've stopped nuclear weapons. They're people who've protested the bulldozing in the occupied territories. They're people who've done important things in their lives. And this play is largely autobiographical. I ain't done shit. And I'm first to admit it. And it's weird to write something knowing you're going to do it, because I'm not so great at stage directions anymore. So you can think of me sitting in front of that typewriter going, no, well, not a typewriter, but you know what I mean. Lights up on Dan, tubby, balding, wearing a pink tie. The tie bought on Canal Street for $7. You can tell I'm not good at writing stage directions for me or other people. I had hoped that when I decided to do this, I could talk to one of my many actor friends and they would do this for me. And they realized it was a whole hour they had to play me and said, no thanks. So that's the story of how this show came about. Now, let's see, where do I start? Crappy year, right? Crappy couple of years. We all lived through COVID. I live in Brooklyn. I was 20 blocks away from a hospital that had big tractor trailers full of dead bodies parked in front of it because they'd run out of morgue space. Okay, ponder that for a moment. Now, the other things that happened, besides the fact that it was hard to find a job, a couple days ago, I went to my kitchen, and the water had flooded. Apparently, the plumbing broke down, and I had 20 gallons of dirty water sitting in my kitchen. And I was kind of hoping that that was going to mean that I'd have dead mice, because we have a rodent problem in my building. So I went to get some bread the other night, and I reached the top of my refrigerator, and there was a hole chewed through a loaf of bread from one side to the other. You could see through it. Apparently, my mice figured out how to leap onto an apron string and swing across to the power cord for my waffle iron, and then climb up the rest of the way to the top of my refrigerator. That really pissed me off. The rest of the people in my building had mice. I had MacGyver. So as bad as things are right now, in 2001, things were worse. I'd had a succession of jobs that didn't pan out for one reason or another. And I was in a job that summer, and they came to me and they said, we're going to lay you off because we don't have any jobs to place. Now, if you've ever been in a personnel agency where they have no jobs to place, you know the economy is shitty. And I was really scared that I was going to be laid off for an extended period of time. So on my last day, it was a Monday, and my boss comes up to me about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and he says, I've got great news. We've got a job for you. You're going to be on help desk. It's a job downtown. It pays more than your current job, and they do temp to perm placements. And I tried to act happy. But, you know, as a 40-something going on a help desk, not so much. I don't like talking to strangers who are angry, first of all. And more to the point, I would be surrounded by 20-somethings whose lips move when they watch Star Trek. Because that's life. So anyway, but it was a job. It was actually more convenient to my apartment than the job I was in. And who knows, they might do temp to perm. It might be fine. So the night before my job, I go home and I find the address is 14 Wall Street, which I've never worked anywhere in Wall Street before. And trying to figure out where it was, and it's actually, according to Yahoo Maps, who here remembers Yahoo Maps? Okay, according to Yahoo Maps, I was 15,000 feet from one of the World Trade Centers. And I looked at the map, and they actually got that wrong because it was all these one-way streets going around. It was driving instructions. When you actually measured the distance, I was only 800 feet. So that was something interesting to keep in mind as I traveled in. And Tuesday morning dawn, I've been through jobs before. I know what you do. You show up a little bit early and you dress properly. You dress like whatever they say is the dress code. And you make sure once you get there, because you're a temp, you always look busy. Okay. So, got on the train, the R train actually, at Rector Street. I got off. And Wall Street was new to me, as I said, the Wall Street area. It's a very different part of town. Everything was spotless, first of all. There was no graffiti. Nobody was misbehaving themselves downtown. And it has its own sort of social retinue there. And also, you go down the streets around Wall Street, and they're very narrow and constricted. And you can't see the tops of buildings as you're walking along. Then the other thing I noticed is that it's a very suit-intensive, tie-intensive place to work. You've got all these people in very high-class outfits, even, office casual. Even office casual is a $500 proposition in Wall Street. So that's where I was. I can cope. So I got out of the subway, and I'm looking around, and I suddenly noticed that people are throwing confetti on me. I wasn't famous. There was no reason for anybody to throw confetti on me. And as I looked at it, as it hit my hand, I realized it wasn't confetti at all. It looked like construction waste, or I later found out it was asbestos fiber and fiberglass that was falling. And I was thinking, what the hell is this doing? And I got to the corner of Broadway and Wall Street, and everybody who was at the crosswalk is staring up, staring north, actually. And I said, what's going on? And somebody finally said, there was some kind of weird plane accident or something up there. Nobody knows what's going on. Fine. Cross the street, get in the building, go to the 25th floor, which is the help desk department. It actually happens to be on the west side of the building. And I walk in, and there are these two picture windows facing west, and I can now see the fire. It was in the North Tower of the World Trade Center, and it was pretty big. And some of the windows had been knocked out, and so there's all this debris sweeping out of the building and just going around in a circle. There were these big pieces of decorative metal, aluminum and steel, that are also falling off the building. And you saw these big reams of tractor feed paper. Remember tractor feed paper? So they were unrolling as they got blown out the windows. So a lot of stuff going on. So I felt a little weird about being there. I mean, I've lived in New York 20-something years. and nothing major has ever happened to me. And there's all this stuff across the street. And meanwhile, here I am, that temp. Hi, everybody. I'm from the agency. And everybody's going, and there is no book I've ever read. I read a lot of stuff, and there's no book I've ever read on etiquette where Emily Post says what you're supposed to do in this situation if the building across the street has been knocked down or something. So there I am. So as I'm sitting there, we get an announcement over the PA system. Hello, this is the building manager. You've probably noticed what's going on across the street. We're asking everyone to stay in the building because of all the falling debris. We will tell you as soon as it's safe to leave. Nice. But meanwhile, it's a little creepy. I notice the phones aren't ringing. On a help desk, the phones are always ringing. But apparently what had happened is the plane had knocked out some of the servers from Verizon. So we didn't have a lot of phone traffic going in. And it wasn't guaranteed you could call somebody. So I'm a little nervous. I want to do a little backstory here for just a moment. That summer was so bad, I couldn't keep a cell phone, okay? Think about that for a minute. And finally, my new supervisor comes over and she says, you might want to call somebody. Here's my cell. And so she gives me her cell phone. And I call my wife. Hi, honey. Oh, not much happening here. Kind of quiet. We're about to go down to Starbucks, get some coffee. Oh, there's something on the news? I hadn't seen it yet. Yeah. And so I'm trying to think of things to say that aren't about what's going on. And suddenly I hear one of my coworkers say, holy crap! And we see the plane coming through the South Tower. And it's blowing all this debris down on us. Its flames are shooting up. And we're close enough to the South Tower we can see people at the windows. And that's when it got bad. Because we could see all these folks. And how are they going to get out? There's a fire underneath them. The windows, the fire department does not have a 1,500-foot ladder they can rescue these folks with. And I felt like a voyeur. All of my coworkers and I are watching all these people face their death. So meanwhile, I'm trying to keep with my rules about being a temp. And it's like, does anybody need their monitor moved? Does anybody need me to adjust their pickup for the printers? Anybody? I sort of felt like, any of y'all see the movie Animal House? I felt like Flounder, the guy who shows up at the toga party in a suit. And fortunately, everybody was ignoring me, which is good. So anyway, there I am, and I've seated myself next to the window. And suddenly somebody yells, it's falling. And I was close enough, the window faced the South Tower, and it tilted this way, and I thought we were done for. And then it went straight down. And as it went down, it sprayed all of this dust and debris all over the place. And of course, the people who were trying to get to the windows, they're gone. And we just watched this. It just tumbles. Somebody in the office was taking a videotape, as it turns out, and it ended up, I think, on Nova. And you can hear people screaming as the tower falls, but you can also hear me going, because I didn't know what else to do. It's like, what a rotten Tuesday. Well, you can't say that in front of your coworkers because they're going to think you're nuts. So there we were. The smoke shot up hundreds and hundreds of feet in the sky. And everybody was panicked, and phones can't ring anymore because phones are definitely down. And suddenly,
This is the building manager. Some of you might have noticed the situation has changed a little bit. You cannot stay in the building because the smoke and the dust has all gotten into the air conditioning system and we'll be breathing it in. So we would like everyone to come down to the lobby and be prepared to evacuate.
Didn't have to tell me twice. So me and my brand new coworker friends all walked down the stairs, and as we got to the second or third floor, we suddenly saw people coming in from inside, and they were covered with this white chalky dust, and underneath the dust they were sweating like crazy because it was hot, and they were all just coming in. So let's see, where does that? Okay, so I get to the lobby, and there's the building manager, and the building staff is all there. And the first thing they do is they hand me one of these. It's an air mask. I mean, who needs to wear these at work? My God. Yeah, I know, foreshadowing. So we're all, my little circle with my new friends, we're all trying to figure out what to do. I mean, yes, we leave the building, but what do we do then? So while we're debating that, finally the dust settles down and we can leave the building. And there's a group of us going uptown because one of the managers has an apartment somewhere around the east side. And some of us are talking about going downtown to pick up the ferry, either the ferry to New Jersey or the ferry to Brooklyn. And then one of my new bosses lives in Brooklyn. So there's a group of us who are going to go to Brooklyn. And we walk outside. It's like when you're a kid and you go to sleep at night and everything looks normal, and you wake up the next morning and there's snow all over the place. 2 hours before, everything in the Wall Street area was pristine. There was no snow. But suddenly there's all this stuff, and many times the ashes are burying shards of metal, so it's not safe to walk around. So we start walking and making these weird noises. And we're walking east. And suddenly we hear a noise that sounds a little like a train, a freight train. And we look over, we look west, and it's obvious now the North Tower is falling. So we start running down Wall Street. And the first building that's open, I hate it when it does that. The first building that's open happens to be 40 Wall Street. And they have a little atrium downstairs and a cafe. And so everybody was running in there, and you can have glass windows facing the street. So we all run in, and not more than a few seconds after we got in, there's this tide of black garbage and flames and everything else just whoosh, shooting down the street. And it looked like, the only thing I can compare it to, and I've never seen this happen before, is like if you had an aquarium and suddenly somebody dumped a bunch of dirty motor oil in it, and it was just covered. Everything was covered. And anybody who was out there would have been in serious, serious trouble. So I'm there with my new coworkers and a bunch of other people who sought refuge there too. And what happens is we all just stare. I mean, there was no screaming at this point. We knew what was happening, and thank God we were someplace safe. So I do not to this day know how long we were in that building, but eventually the debris all settled a little bit. And it had been settled for a while, and suddenly this big, brawny firefighter comes in. He looked like Tom Selleck had a bad day. And he's got a big mustache, and he looks really upset. And he says, all right, you cannot stay here. It is not safe for you to stay in this area. If you can go uptown to catch a train to Westchester or something, do that.
Sorry, I thought I turned it off.
So then the fireman got a call. No, he didn't get a call. If you can go south, you can pick up one of the ferries, maybe go across to Hudson or Brooklyn, or you can go east, across the bridges. But you cannot stay here. There's too much debris. We don't know what else is happening. So he leaves. So me and my friends all go back out on the street and start walking east again. And you can't hear very much. People aren't talking to each other. It's not like the normal day-to-day conversations you have. And we realized we were hearing muted sounds of police sirens and fire trucks. And we realized what had happened is they had all been buried under all the rubble. And so they were slowly running until the batteries ran down. So we got up to an intersection on Wall Street, and there was a taxi stopped in the middle of the intersection. It was still running, and the keys were in. The driver had seen what was coming and realized he couldn't get out and just ran. And then about a half block later, we saw this trolley truck. It was full of donuts and things. And he had all these trays of donuts and pastries and everything, and they were covered with all this asbestos dust, and they were just putting them back in the truck like he was going to take them somewhere else. So anyway, we got to the Brooklyn Bridge. And there were 1,000 people on the bridge. I've been on the bridge with protests and things, and there were just more people than I'd ever seen. And we were all crossing the bridge. And not many people were looking back, but if you looked back, you could see that the smoke and everything went all the way up the sky. And every once in a while, we heard an emergency vehicle, get on, would start honking or getting on the bridge to cross. And everybody on the bridge just moved to the side until they got through. But for most of us, the emergency was really over. It was time to get home. So we crossed the bridge, and my new supervisor had a cousin who was working downtown Brooklyn, and he drove us home. That was my first day of work. Okay, audience participation again. Were any of you actually downtown on 9/11? Did you see this stuff happen? Because I want to know if I got it right. When I decided to start writing this play, I realized it was 3,700 days since I've witnessed this, and I'm trying to get this all right. Anyway, the 12th comes the next morning, and I get up like I'm going to work, and I pull on my cargo shorts and my sneakers and a t-shirt. And I don't know why, it's force of habit, I guess. I went down to the subway. And I wasn't the only one, actually. There were dozens of people. They were dressed like they were going to work. They had the suits on, the hat, everything else. But they weren't in line for the subway because the subway wasn't running. They were in line at the newsstand because they were going to buy the Times, the Daily News, the Post, Newsday, and they were going to buy all those. It's almost like they didn't believe what they'd just seen in their own lives. That's what everybody's mentality was. And as soon as everybody got their papers, they went home. And so did I. Anyway, so that was the second day. This is the part where I get a little muddy. Okay, yeah. Okay. Anyway, if you weren't living in New York at that time, you saw this on TV, but you didn't really sense it the way we did. It was like we were part of a wake for the next few weeks because this horrible thing had happened. And the cameras left and the reporters left, but we still had to live with all of this. And a lot of things changed, and some of them never came back. So the first thing I should tell you is starting on the Tuesday night after 9/11, we started getting calls at 4 a.m. Now, what had happened after the towers collapsed, all of Verizon's switching equipment got broken. So you could make some calls locally, but you couldn't use *69 to figure out who was talking to you, and you couldn't pick up your voicemail. So I wasn't getting that many calls anyway, but at 4 a.m. someone was calling us every night for the next week. And, you know, I don't want to answer the phone at 4 a.m. if somebody's calling and leaving a long message or something. So we just let it go. So this is something nobody knows about because, like I said, about a week later, they had everything mostly fixed and I could finally access my voicemail. I'm going to use an Archie Bunkerism here. We were getting calls from a prevert. Somebody was calling us every night to see if me and my wife would like to join him and some circus animals and a camera crew. Wasn't quite as funny then. And the thing is, at one point I realized as I'm listening to this message, I found somebody in New York who was happy about 9/11. Because he could make all these calls he wanted to, and nobody could catch him. I erased them all, by the way. So let's see, what else can I tell you? The day I got home, I had a call, a real call, from a friend. Her name is Sylvie. Sylvie is a peace activist that I've worked with in 1999. I've gone to the Netherlands with her, and we've done a March for Peace. And Sylvie is probably one of the bravest people I know. I haven't written about her yet because I can't play her. But you know, she had disabled a submarine in Fossland in Scotland to protest against nuclear-armed submarines. She had been at protests in the East Bank to keep them from tearing down houses. She had been sprayed with pepper spray numerous times. She's lost count. But she's not afraid of much. And she's also somebody who's very honest about life. I was very glad to hear from her, and she was very relieved I didn't die. She had been worried about me. And so we're talking on the phone, and she suddenly says, I hope this was not a surprise. Well, it kind of was. But to her way of thinking, we Americans had been dropping bombs all over the world for 20 years and nobody had struck back. And now somebody just did. And she said, I know what's going to happen. The bombers are going to fly and they're going to drop bombs on whoever they think they can. And you can't do anything about it. And I'm sorry about that. But I hope you have a nice day, click. I mean, I was taken aback, but she's wrong. This is never going to happen that way. And then 2 days later, I get another phone call from somebody I didn't expect to hear from. It was John. John was living with my sister and had been for a while. And we didn't call him John, we called him Asshole. because he was just not a nice person. But he's calling me for the first time in their relationship. He calls me and he says, "Man, I'm so worried about you. I'm so sorry this happened to you. Man, you must be really shook up. Man, I'm so sorry, man." And on and on and on. And there was something about it. So I waited for a moment and it got quiet and he said, "So, like, what I was wondering is if you'd mind if I came up to New York and stayed with you so you can show me the sights." So he could show me the wreckage. And John had been in the Army for 10 years and had stopped. But this was the perfect time to go back in. He'd keep his rank, he could finish up his pension, and he'd get to kill some ragheads, as he said. And this was not a conversation I really wanted to have with anybody at the moment. And I made up an excuse that, we really were not in any condition to put him up for a few days to look at all the wreckage. And he hung up on me, and I think that was my last phone conversation with him, and I couldn't be happier. So the Sunday after all this happened, we belonged to a church in Manhattan, and we went in, and our subways actually worked. And we stopped at Washington Square Park, and Washington Square Park was full of the people who are usually chased out by the police. The graffiti artists, the hip-hop artists, all the other people who just sort of congregate there. The cops are busy with other things. So we're walking around the park, and the first thing we notice is, those bus stops by West 4th Street, and they've got the big panels for the advertising going up and down. Well, somebody had painted over the panel. And instead of saying, go to the Bahamas or something, it said, "You are alive. You are alive." That was a thought. And then as we're walking around the fountain at Washington Square Park, we noticed that artists with chalk had written all these great things on the sidewalk. And one of them had actually written all 3 sets of lyrics to John Lennon's Imagine. And that kind of set my mind a little bit differently. So anyway, that's how things were for a few days. Here was the weird experience. Like anything else is normal. But here was my weird experience. I had to go back to my temp job on the following Monday. So everybody was going to be walked through and everybody was going to be checked to make sure they weren't bringing anything. And so I got downtown and I stood in line and they said, "By the way, we need your work ID." And I'm like, "Hi, I'm a temp." So they had me sort of move over to one side and be very quiet while they called everybody at my office and so forth. And so I was let in. And the thing about downtown right after is that they've done a masterful job in most, maybe most streets in cleaning everything up. But you could go down some of these side streets and they were still up to here with the asbestos dust and everything else. And also, they brought tractor trailers in. And the tractor trailers had electrical generators because the electricity wasn't back. And that was another thing. The reporters who were down there didn't get it. There was a smell of rot everywhere. And they were trying to make it like it was about the buildings. But in fact, there'd been no electricity in any of the diners or restaurants or catering halls all week. Oh, I haven't mentioned falling down yet, have I? We'll get to it. So there was that. Then the next thing you notice, didn't happen right away in the Wall Street area, but eventually it did, is every flat surface had little flyers on it. And there were flyers. Have you seen Karen? My brother Jerry is missing. All kinds of things written on them, phone numbers, frequently photographs, and they were all over the place. And being that I'm a church-going guy, I thought these were all prayers, and they were all going unanswered. The first Sunday after all of this happened, after I went to church, there was a giant vigil in Prospect Park, and there were hundreds of people outside, all looking on to each other to have some kind of reassurance, I guess. And the thing I remember was there was a woman, kind of big boned, youngish, and she had what looked like her daughter was with her. Kid maybe 13, 14 years old, but very clingy. And unlike the rest of the crowd, you could look at them and see that they probably didn't have much more than the clothes on their back. And as you looked at them interact with each other, you realized they knew Daddy wasn't coming home. So let's see, what else do I have to say about this? Pardon me. Okay, so then next, I'm trying to get used to this routine of going back into this space. Everything was messed up. Anybody who lived through that time remembers all the times the subways were changed or not working, or, suddenly there would be some shutdown of the electricity, something like that. And meanwhile, things were getting ugly. Everything that Sylvie said to me was coming true, that we were looking for a war. Now, I should explain to you right now, so that nobody leaves pissed off. I was angry about this too. I wanted bin Laden. I wanted Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the man who planned it. We got him. I wanted them to be put in trial. I wanted them to face justice. I wanted to find out everything that I could about this. And the thing is, I wanted it to happen soon, because I could see already how angry people were becoming the more time we wasted on not finding these folks. And I could see, I was a peace activist, for crying out loud. I'm in the wrong field in 9/11. And I could see how moods were changing and the anger was building. In my neighborhood, my building was almost all Muslim, but they were Muslims who were refugees from Bosnia. They were refugees from Sarajevo, Croatia. And they wanted nothing to do with this bin Laden guy. They just wanted to live their lives. And it got really ugly for them in my neighborhood because they were Muslim. So here I am. And I started walking with them when they went to stores together. And my neighbors couldn't figure this out because they knew the women were Muslim, but what's that beat-up Methodist guy doing with them? And meanwhile, my peace friends, the people that I thought of, would understand this, they did what they could. My sister-in-law and her husband did volunteer work down at the Rock Pile. They served food to the volunteers. They ran a soup kitchen. And they did this for weeks on end. But it was still an ugly proposition to be anywhere where you thought differently than the crowd. And we found this out quickly, a few weeks later, at my church again. You see, my church was part of United Methodist, and we were just far enough north, our building, that we didn't get any of the debris, and just far enough south that we were close by for people who lived downtown. So they were coming to us for meals and for a place to stay and for referrals for disaster aid and so forth. And they were doing all this at my church. And the people in charge said, "Great, we'll send missionaries." So they sent all the missionaries they could find in flyover states. And they came to our service. And we knew there was going to be a little issue because the first thing they wanted to do was sing "Onward, Christian Soldiers." And my church, it used to be my church. My church was an old peace church. We had been founded to support the Underground Railroad. And so we didn't like this kind of talk. We were the place where people making their way to Canada to escape the draft, that's where they stayed in my church. So we didn't get along with those folks because what we really needed out of the Methodist denomination, we needed money because we were spending all this money to feed people. We were spending all this money to do services. And the thing not many people know, not long after 9/11, our insurance was quadrupled for the building to a point we couldn't afford it. You know, when people come up to me and say, "I wonder where they got all that money to give to Larry Silverstein," I know. Everybody's insurance went up in the nonprofit world. And so we went as long as we could. And then we had to close down. It's a co-op for rich people now. Okay, I'm sorry. We have to mention Falling Dawn, right? That was the title. So here's the deal. The day I showed up, 9/11, I actually had plans for the weekend because, as I made clear, I'm a playwright, and we had a play that was opening downtown just below Canal Street. And I thought it was going to be a really important play because we were going to talk about Vietnam. And my co-writer was a Vietnam vet, and he had been in court because he had started organizing protests against the Vietnam War in Vietnam. So he's in Cam Bay handing out petitions about the war. And there's a whole issue about whether you can do that legally if you're just addressing a congressperson. It's a long story. But it was a great play because one of the things we did is we didn't sanitize the war. He had been around sniper attacks and so forth. He saw some awful things. And to tell those stories on September 10th was great. But to tell those stories on September 13th, New York was over the idea that wars happen bloodlessly. And the neighborhood was closed down anyway. So we couldn't do the play. And that's when I started thinking about Falling Dawn. And this is my representation of Falling Dawn. I can't show you the picture of the real Falling Dawn because there's a copyright issue. But the real Falling Dawn was in the restaurant at Windows on the World, and he had to jump to escape the flames. And so you saw a picture of him, something like this, falling straight down. And I identified with him. You know, the picture, he looked a little like me, a little tubby, not a great haircut. And I thought about this guy and how he lived those last few seconds of his life. Anyway, so after my show was canceled, I started thinking about writing about Falling Dawn. You know, I mean, as my friend had said, there are thousands of falling Muhammads. There are people who fall all over the world because of war. What do we have to say about them? So I had this real inspiration was going to do a 2-character play. It was going to be Falling Dawn, and it was going to be God. And in my play, the actor playing Falling Dawn was going to lean over the audience like this, because he's going to have a harness on, like he's falling, and he's screaming. And as he's screaming, lights come up on God. Oh, he isn't here now. He had another gig. In my play, God, it looks like Larry Davis in a Hawaiian shirt. And he's actually putting his hands over his ears because of all the screaming that Don is doing. And finally he comes over because he's sympathetic. He really is. He understands this. And he starts talking. And Don and God are talking. And finally he says, I can't make this right. Someday it will be made right, but it can't be made right today. And so his good news for Falling Dawn is that he will not experience pain in this death. That he'll be gone like a second. And he'll be able to pretend he's flying for as long as he wants to. And so this was the play I came up with, except I couldn't figure out an ending. Because God is going to want something out of him. He's going to want Falling Dawn to forgive these people. And Falling Dawn is not in the mood for forgiveness. I mean, that whole Christianity thing about forgive your... It didn't work. I couldn't figure out a way to write a play like that. So I never finished it. I just need to check what time it is. Oh, okay. So that's most of what I have to say. Life went on, I did protests when I could to stop the war effort. And I tried to be friends with people even though we didn't agree on what I thought about the world. And I kept hoping that they'd catch Bin Laden and put him on trial. And for a while, I tried to befriend some of the people in the Truther movement. And I quickly found out they didn't want me to hang around because they had their own theory. And their theory was that the planes weren't real, it was all a projection. Or as they said, it's all laser pointers, man. There were no planes there. It's all a lie, man. So you didn't have any friends in that group if you thought there were actual planes. So I had to leave them too. So I had a lonely few years. And let's see, what does that take us up to? It's 20 years ago, right? I couldn't find any impetus for new plays about peace. I couldn't find producers. After the insurance went up for everybody, a lot of small theaters closed and I couldn't find work anymore. In 2008, that great job I had where they put me in, it went away. It went away because there was a crash called the Lehman crash. See, what happened, this is my theory, what happened is that after 9/11, the Securities and Exchange Commission was jobbed into finding Bin Laden and the people who manipulated the stock market. And they were so busy with that, they didn't look at all the shenanigans going on in the mortgage field. That's my theory anyway. And suddenly, the whole economy goes down the toilet. So I lost that day job. And like a lot of other people, I could never find one that replaced it. That, covered the pension and the health care and everything else. So I worked a lot of really shitty little temp jobs until I reached that magic age. So let's see, what else? I tried not to think about 9/11. I tried not to think about what had been lost and what wasn't explained. And I did as well as I could, and I was even trying to ignore the 20th anniversary. And then I got this phone call last October. It was from one of the 5 people I was running down Wall Street with on that day. How are you doing, Steve? Well, I'm okay. How are you? Okay, well, what's going on? I just want to tell you I have lymphoma. That, like many other people who were trapped downtown in all of the destruction, he had a cancer. And he was going to retire, but he didn't know how long he had. And meanwhile, all the shitty jobs I've had, I haven't had health care in years. So I don't know. I mean, I feel okay. But according to the attorneys handling all the cases, there are more people dead now after 9/11 than there were on 9/11. So what else can we say about the 20th anniversary? Taliban's back. Everything that we sent over there is gone. ISIS, well, they're not Al-Qaeda, but they're trying to rebuild. And as for me, before I say that, my sister-in-law and her husband passed away from cancer several years ago. And their kids want to say, no, it had nothing to do with 9/11. It had nothing to do with downtown. And I just leave that be. I never heard from John again. He and my sister broke up. That's a win. And I've turned 65 now, and I've come to the conclusion that I will never know answers to all of my questions about 9/11. It just won't happen. And I guess I have to apologize to you because I came here with a play that really doesn't have an end that I'm happy with. But it's still part of our lives. And if you're in New York and you were here then, it's always going to be part of your life. And I'm not here to advocate you all believe it was laser pointers, man. I just think we need to understand what that was about, because as I've kept in touch with Sylvie, it's made clear to me all the falling Dons and all the falling Mohammeds and all the people who died fighting in Iraq and then fighting in Afghanistan and then all the civil wars that have followed. And at some point, we've got to figure out how not to have that happen anymore. And I don't really know how to do that. And I was hoping when I wrote this that I would. I'm going to leave you with a joke from my wife who can't be here tonight. Elderly couple married many years, they hate each other. And they're always bitching at each other and arguing. And husband goes out one morning, comes back. He's all happy. He's enthused. He says, I've got it. It's the answer to all of our prayers. We're going to solve everything that's wrong. And she's like, what are you babbling about? He says, I went to this weird religious ceremony, and the guy in charge, he said, he has an answer to all this. He can fix everything. and all we have to do is follow him. And the wife is like, oh yeah? Tell me. It's the greatest secret in the world. It's unconditional love. And all we have to do is follow that, and the world will be at peace. And the wife is like, it's interesting. How does it work? He says, if you give me unconditional love, I'll give you unconditional love. And as long as we keep giving each other unconditional, yeah, it doesn't work. She never gets a laugh on this. As for me, you know, I'm a 9/11 survivor. I thought in my life and my travels, you know, people would listen to my story. And every time I've ever told anybody that, well, I shouldn't say recently, but in years past, somebody at the bar would come up and say, that's okay, we're going to take care of this for you. And I didn't want anybody to go off and kill people for me. Hell, I wanted a free beer. So I guess that's where we are right now. I'm sorry I don't have an ending better for you in the play. I know I'm going to die without knowing answers to any of the questions I have. And therefore, you won't either. And I just know that if we can't figure out how to reconcile over this, there's going to be a lot more falling dominoes. So I wish you all peace wherever you can find it.
Got up Wednesday morning, left at my door. Walked a bit on Bleecker Street, past bottled antiques.
Before all of you go, it should be a reminder that 100% of the box office ticket sales go directly to the artist. And
so I just buttoned up my coat, headed on my way.
And your donations are very, very generous. Donations are how we keep the lights on here. It's how we pay our staff. It's how we're able to put on this festival, which we're very lucky to do, especially given our current climate. And we're probably the only theater company in New York who are putting on festivals right now. And
it's all right to be
like, we really encourage your donations to help us keep going, and we greatly appreciate it. Thank you. There's a jar outside the door, and we thank you again for your cooperation and your donations and just being so generous. Thank you.
I thank you very much for coming out in the cold weather and yes, support the company.
Have you
great place
heard
being
the
done
story?
at this
Have you
all over
read
the place, so
the
check out our notes. Thank you.
Lost my good time buddy, I've got them hard time blues. I'll spare you all the details, his end was far too grim. Robert was a damn good friend, this song is for him.
Oh, thank you very much.
I
Do I
don't
know?
know
No. Oh, okay.
I
That's
go
okay too.
south,
I'm damn.
one like